Good afternoon, everyone. We're here for the Community Agriculture Commission meeting, and item 1 of the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If we could have someone approve the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda.
Okay.
Seconder. All in favor? All right. The next item is the adoption of the minutes, and we've got 2 minutes to adopt. One from July the 8th of 2020. And have we got someone to approve those minutes? Oh, it was Meg.
Okay.
So we have a motion to approve the first agenda of July 8th, 2020. Seconder? Jen? All in favor? Okay. Next item is the approval of the second minutes, which is November 10th of 2020. Fran, you have a question? You approve it? Motion to approve?
Yep.
And I'll second it. And all in favor? Okay. The next item is the official community plan update, and I believe that there will be a presentation from staff. Is that right?
That is correct. Hi, this is Ignatius from the consulting team, MODUS.
Yes, that's correct. There will be a presentation from our consulting team, which is made up of MODUS Planning and Design, as well as a subconsultant, Uplands Consulting, who will be giving a presentation today. To update the Agricultural Commission on the work so far on the official community plan review.
Great. Is that a cue for us to begin?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. As a reintroduction, my name is Ignatius. I'm a planner with MODUS, and I'm the project manager for this project. I have my colleagues Patrick and Ione here, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Patrick Oistrakh. I'm senior planner at MODUS Planning, Design, and Engagement. And of course, we're really excited to be working on this important official community plan update for North Saanich. I have about 7 years of experience working as a planner in community planning at the city of Abbotsford. So I do have a bit of understanding of planning within an agricultural context and in a community that really values its agriculture. And I'm excited to apply that to your community as well here. So I'll pass it on to Ione now.
Hi everybody, my name is Ione Smith. I'm senior agrologist at Upland Agricultural Consulting, and I have about a dozen years of consulting experience around British Columbia, working on agricultural plans, strategies, and business feasibility assessments. And I'm helping out with MODUS on the agricultural component of the OCP update.
Great, thanks to you both. And so I'm going to share my screen now, and let me know if everyone can see this.
Yes, we can all see it. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. So, just as a quick overview of how we're going to spend our time today, we'll do a brief project overview plus a quick overview of phase 1 engagement. Then we'll dive into a discussion of the discussion papers, primarily focusing on the agriculture and the food sector discussion paper led by Ione, and then followed up by any comments and questions you folks may have. And I'm sure many of you around the table already know, but just to make sure we're all on the same page here. So the OCP review was endorsed by Council back in March 2020, and they endorsed these 3 broad guiding principles for how we'll be doing this work. So the first is innovative, broad, and inclusive engagement, meaning throughout this project, we will be doing our best efforts to include as many people and as many different types of people that work, live, and play in North Saanich. This includes residents, business owners, property owners, renters, and First Nations that have the traditional territories within North Saanich boundaries. This also means engaging with and working with the Capital Regional District, BC Transit, and other key institutional partners. The second guiding principle is that we want to create a user-friendly document. And so this is something oftentimes, official community plans live on a shelf and they have like really hard to access language, not very engaging. And so we're endeavoring to have clear language, useful graphics, and something that really captures the story of North Saanich. And finally, a policy alignment. So there are lots of existing plans and great plans and policies in North Saanich, and we need to be able to align this OCP so that it doesn't contravene with existing policy. And this OCP seeks to not only align with existing policy, but as well as ongoing processes such as the tree bylaw, for example. Council also endorsed a series of topics to be explored. I won't go in depth into each of these, but as you can see on screen, agriculture and food systems was deemed important by Council, marine and forestry issues, housing, roads and transportation, light industry, servicing, commercial, heritage and archaeology, the airport lands, economic development, climate action, temporary use permits, community and social wellness, Shoal and Sam Harper Integrated Management Plan, local neighborhood planning processes, as well as updating the regional context statement. And here is a high-level overview of the process that we'll be taking to review and update the OCP. So the first phase, which has already passed, took place from August to December. And here we're really just setting the groundwork, trying to understand the current conditions, doing background research. And we've also started engagement with First Nations. We have conducted some pre-engagement interviews, have started engaging with the advisory working group, as well as conducted pop-up events and online engagement for the public. We are now kicking off phase 2, and the end goal is to have an emerging concepts report, which is ultimately some high-level policy direction on key OCP topics. We hope in this report to have a refined vision as well as refined goals for the OCP. Following that, we'll be drafting the OCP with a series of engagement activities, and then in phase 4, we'll be finalizing the OCP. Now, onto the discussion papers. And so, as some of you are already aware, we've drafted 6 discussion papers, and these are, as the name suggests, for discussion. These are some early ideas to spark conversation and to try to gather community's input on what direction we want to be taking our community over the next 20 years. And these discussion papers, which can be found on Connect North Saanich, the district's engagement platform, each of these discussion papers are structured in the following way. So what is the current situation? What does the current OCP say about a certain topic? What does the regional growth strategy and regional context statement say about this topic? What are some trends and challenges, and what are the opportunities? And this is applied to, as you can see, the 6 different discussion papers. And today, we will be here talking about agriculture and the food sector. So I'll hand it off to Ione.
Thanks, Ignatius. So as Ignatius mentioned, there's a few different topics that the discussion papers looked at. And so I'll go through many of them. I've just got 3 slides, but a few things to say, and then I think we can open it up for questions. So first of all, I just wanted to review what the current situation is regarding the agricultural land base within the district of North Saanich. A lot of what's actively happening in terms of farming on the land base is pasture and forage. So what we would call extensive agriculture or non-intensive agriculture. So rearing of livestock, forage crops would include corn and hay and that sort of thing. So that accounts for, again, approximately 80% of the agricultural land base currently. There are just over 1,300 hectares of agricultural land, and approximately 320 of them are considered available for farming. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, this means land that can be used for agricultural purposes without displacing the current use. So that works out to about 24% has potential for agricultural expansion. But of course, there are limitations. So some of the limitations that have come up in discussion at the District of North Saanich has been around existing non-agricultural use of some farmland parcels. Sometimes the size of the parcels can limit the diversity and agricultural business feasibility. Also, there may be landowners who have no intention of farming, but also are not interested in leasing the land. So there can be a lack of leasing opportunities. And the rising cost of land. As I'm sure you're all aware, the cost of land on Vancouver Island is extremely high. In fact, the Farm Credit Canada's recent report noted that the cost of farmland rose over 13% from 2018 to 2019, such that now land can fetch over $100,000 an acre for farmland on southern Vancouver Island. Next slide, please. Some of the key issues facing the agriculture sector are listed here, and I'll go through them each and discuss a little bit of their challenges and some of the opportunities as well that come along with each of them. So first off is climate change, and obviously climate change can bring both positive and negative impacts to agriculture. So some of the positive impacts might include the ability to grow a greater diversity of crops or having a longer growing season. But on the flip side of that, there can be negative impacts, such as increases in drought, newer pests and diseases, flooding and wildfire threats, and so on. Protecting farmland at the local level can benefit the whole community and can help mitigate some of these climate change impacts by preventing things like stormwater runoff, reducing wildfire risk, and minimizing the urban heat island effect as well. It's also important to note that farmland is critical in holding carbon in the soil, so acting as an important carbon sequestration tool. There are partnerships and existing initiatives that can be strengthened with groups such as the BC Agriculture and Food Climate Action Initiative, and these can further assist ensuring that local food producers have the tools and resources they need to navigate climate change impacts. Next is farm labor. Obviously, there's been a lack of labor in the recent years, and most importantly, because of COVID-19, this has been really exacerbated. This creates uncertainty for farmers, even over and above the usual uncertainty that can occur. Regulations surrounding farm worker housing can also be confusing. They are cross-jurisdictional. The federal, provincial, and local governments all have roles to play with regards to farm worker housing. The District of North Saanich can continue to adopt the published best practices that are in place regarding size and siting of temporary farm worker housing, and staff reports should be accompanying all ALC applications for farm worker housing. But this is going to be an issue that I think will continue to be raised in the near to long-term future. And next on the list is food system infrastructure. So when I say food system infrastructure, I'm talking about everything that's related to the production piece. So distribution, processing, storage, retail, and food waste management as well. Obviously, regional infrastructure can support the supply chain for local food systems, and it's quite important. It will also ensure that that access for smaller scale farms to food hubs where shared equipment can be accessed, or commissaries where food processing can happen at a more affordable scale can occur. But these pieces of infrastructure all require servicing, so roads, water and power, utilities, often at high levels or loads that are maybe not appropriate to be put out into rural or ALR areas. So therefore, at the local government level, this fine balance needs to occur where it must be struck to increase that availability of servicing and infrastructure without changing the character of those rural areas as well. It's also important to note that the Agricultural Land Commission oversees food processing over and above a certain size, and so the ALR regulations also have a role to play to that effect. Land access, so this goes back to what I was talking about in terms of the cost of farmland. Farmland's becoming not only more and more difficult for new and emerging farmers to access, you know, the recent initiatives such as the Sandown Center for Regenerative Agriculture is great. There's also been initiatives at the regional level towards developing a farmland trust for publicly owned agricultural land. I think this really points to broad support at the community level for increasing access to and the productivity of farmland. I think that that level of support will continue to grow in the next, you know, decade or so. And that will ensure that some of these initiatives maintain momentum. I think the District of North Saanich can continue to play a leadership role in that, and along with some other municipalities, such as the District of Saanich, can make sure that those access initiatives don't lose momentum. There's also some great organizations that are active in this area, such as Young Agrarians and CR Fair, that they will be key partners to tackling farmland access. And this is also an area where I think it's really key to ensure that collaboration occurs with Indigenous communities to ensuring access not only to conventional types of agriculture, but food, foraging, hunting, and fishing as well. And in terms of the last issue that I've got to talk about, that's around land use conflicts. So as I'm sure it's not likely foreign to you, there can be lots of ALR compliance issues that are tricky to deal with at the local level because local bylaw enforcement doesn't have much jurisdiction over this. However, there's been some really great initiatives in the last few years where collaboration has occurred between the ALC's enforcement branch and local governments, most recently in Kelowna and the Central Okanagan, where priority issues were identified and dealt with on a implementable, action-based timeline over a very short period of time. This also can come up against things like an edge boundary between farming and non-farming areas. So land use conflicts can be minimized if we can increase things like buffers. A development permit area for farmland protection is one element of an OCP that could be brought in, for example. And I'll talk a bit more about buffers on the next slide. So for the last slide, I just wanted to make an effort to connect agriculture to the other components of the OCP. So first off is housing and affordability. So we talked about the cost of farmland going up, and agricultural lands can serve many functions, of course, but there's lots of competing uses and interests for farmland. So while it might be one of the most expensive areas to farm in Canada, on the flip side, often farmland is the least expensive type of land to try to develop because it's still greenfield. And so when residential, commercial, or industrial projects arise, farmland can often be targeted for development. This creates pressure on farmland, obviously, for other uses. District of North Saanich also has quite a lot of agricultural land outside of the ALR, which doesn't benefit from that protection. And so that is even more vulnerable to potential development pressures in the future. We must continue to protect farmland to reinforce urban growth areas. This in turn will have an impact on ensuring that low density residential development is kept in check. And this will lead to a greater variety of housing types within an urbanized core or a denser core. And this can often lead to a range of affordability as well. Next up is climate change. So obviously taking action on climate change goes hand in hand with creating resilient agricultural systems and carbon retention within soils, as I mentioned. It's also important to know that the agricultural sector right now is really at the forefront of developing innovative technology to minimize greenhouse gas emissions and recapture carbon, as well as being at the forefront of much of the land stewardship initiatives within British Columbia. In terms of natural systems, agricultural landscapes play a critical role in the protection of ecosystem services. So everything from ensuring that riparian areas are protected and fish habitat and wildlife habitat are protected. There are newer programs at the provincial level, such as the Farmland Advantage, which provides economic compensation for farmers who do take on an active role in protecting and enhancing natural habitat. Some of the most biodiverse areas in British Columbia are in regions that are also the most agriculturally active, such as southern Vancouver Island. So it's really important to make sure that farmers are on side when it comes to protecting these key natural systems. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's important for local governments to play a role in encouraging and requiring vegetative buffers between non-farming and farming areas. These buffers can often play critical corridor roles between existing habitats for species at risk and other significant and critical species to ensure that habitat's protected. Lastly is jobs and the local economy. I think it's simple enough to state that local farms create local jobs, but that's not always evident at the field level. Often some of the laborers who are doing the hardest work on farms are coming in from other countries or overseas. But farms don't only spur on-farm jobs, they also spur on off-farm jobs. So that could include processing jobs, distribution, retail, and food waste management. There's also evidence more and more emerging of the impact that farming has on a large number of what we call secondary employment. So that could be things like farm equipment sales or agricultural fairs and markets, business planning, crop consulting, so on and so forth. Suffice to say that if our food is being produced elsewhere, those jobs are being also kept elsewhere. In fact, a study at Kwantlen in 2013 demonstrated that in Surrey, if the city of Surrey brought 280 acres of fallow land into agricultural production, these are publicly owned lands, if they brought 280 acres of land into production, they would have the potential to contribute over $15 million in gross revenue to Surrey's local economy and could create up to 136 full-time equivalent jobs. So local jobs and the local economy have a direct relationship to local agriculture as well. So that's all I've prepared formally, but I'm happy to take any questions.
For the people that are attending remotely, do any of you have any questions? Okay, we got a question from the people here in person. Fran, do you have a question?
Just to play devil's advocate here, if we're going to take up everything for farming, including barriers and all that, there's going to be talk about opportunity use for land. And people are going to say, well, what about the other things we can do with this land? That's one question. The other one is that I like the way you link things to the OCP, but there are problems with that too. There's the issue of climate change, for instance. If you look at raising cattle, for instance, there's a lot of methane that comes out of those things that actually are not good for climate change. And so it's not altogether straightforward in my mind. And I've tried to support agriculture all this time, but I must admit that I look forward to a balanced community of some sort, and maybe we need to reevaluate some of the ways in which we're working.
Okay, thank you. I heard some comments, but I wasn't quite sure what the question was. So I think the first question was around what other things can be done with the land. Is that your question?
That's correct.
So, you know, simply put, if land is in the agricultural land reserve, then nothing can be done with it other than agriculture. It's really the primary use of it is for farming. and that is at the provincially zoned level. So any changes would need to be brought to the ALC in a formal application. There are farmlands, agriculturally zoned land within the District of North Saanich that are outside the ALR. And I suppose that would be up to the longer term planners at the district to decide as to what can be done to the land. But with regards to the OCP, certainly the priority has been to protect farmland, not only for if it's currently being farmed, but for future demands for food security needs as well.
Just to follow up, I think the OCP should be focusing on growing food for human consumption. There isn't a specific statement in that regard. And I've noticed that most of this land is used for forage, right? 75% of the land is going towards that.
Yep, and you raise a good point. I guess the challenge with that is that there's no legal mechanism to require farmers to farm specific crops. So you can put it in as a goal or as an objective, but in reality, in terms of implementation, there are not any mechanisms out there to require anyone to take on a specific business approach with regard to farming.
Does anyone else have a question from either remotely or in person? I have a question. I think Jen has one, so maybe I'll just ask mine next. I found it interesting, the comments that you made about Surrey and the fact that the District of North Saanich has small parcels of potential agricultural land that aren't going to be protected by, or are not protected by the ALR. And given the jobs that Surrey has now discovered or generated from acquiring or farming such properties, and I don't think maybe the official community plan is the place, but it's something interesting to consider whether the district should, if there's parcels that can be accumulated collectively to make the area a bigger area and more feasible for farming, that might be something to consider as a long-term goal for the district, because I think as population grows in the Greater Victoria area and through to Sydney, the pressure on the District of North Saanich as time goes on to protect agriculture is going to become greater and greater every year we move forward. And perhaps not in my lifetime, but I'm very concerned about what food security and what agriculture is going to look like 75 years down the road with the continued population growth that's happening, perhaps not in the district per se, but in all the surrounding areas. So it's just food for thought, something to think about, whether the districts ever considered that type of option.
I like your food for thought, no pun intended, right? When I was working with the Capital Regional District looking at an initiative around farmland access, that was exactly the objective. It was to try to identify lands within each of the municipalities that had the potential for food production that could be managed together cohesively through, the region as an umbrella organization to work on servicing those lands. So bringing them up to production quality for fencing and drainage and irrigation, and then leasing those lands out to new and emerging farmers who often can't afford to purchase land themselves. An example of where it's been really successful is also the city of Richmond. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Garden City lands in Richmond, but they've worked with Kwantlen Polytechnic on a partnership there. So those were city-owned land in the ALR, and they've protected about half for parks purposes, recreation, and then they've leased out the rest of it to Kwantlen University and make sure that their farm school has a long-term base from which to work from.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question to Ignatius, please?
Yeah, I think Jen's next, and then we'll come to you. Jen, go ahead.
Hi, Ione. Thank you for your presentation. I have one comment just on the heels of Susan, and then one question. And my first comment is just to really emphasize how difficult it is to access, for emerging farmers to access the farmland around here, which you've spoken to. But the demand is high, and I want to emphasize that I'm part of the building out of Sandown, and we had a 3-week window to advertise to emerging farmers to see who was interested in coming onto the land. And in a 3-week window, we had 28 very strong applicants. And so it really does speak to the very important role that North Saanich can play in making farmland available for emerging farmers. And I think it's really important to emphasize that actually people are interested in 1/4 acre parcels and 1/2 acre parcels up to 1 acre. It's not a lot of land that people are wanting to access. And one woman who we've hired on for doing the public programming, she ran a 40-member CSA program, a harvest box program, off of a 1/4 acre of land. So we often have a perception that we need large tracts of land, but actually food production can happen in very small spaces. So it's how do we solve this very challenging puzzle of the financial access, the financial barrier for these farmers. And the thinking that I've done is that, you know, we do have estate homes. We have 5-acre ALR parcels being sold for residential use. That is the reality here. I don't think that we're going to be able to change that. But what we can do is perhaps look for ways within our municipality to really cultivate a sense of pride and possibility for those estate home owners, that they could live in a beautiful place and then lease out the land around the house, and in a sense sponsor emerging farmers. And I think that that is a solution that we should really look at. What would that take? What would the mechanisms need to be in place to really make sure that that works really well?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point. And I know Metro Vancouver about 5 years ago did quite a lot of digging into that same problem. They were noticing that particularly out towards Langley, there were a lot of 5 to 10 acre lots that were being purchased by people with no intention of farming it. And their polling suggested that about 1/4 of the people would never be interested in farming it, regardless of whatever incentives you threw their way. They just don't want the look of it or any of it near them. Then there were about another 60% that didn't feel that the farm tax status threshold was a good enough incentive. So that basically it would just take $2,500 worth of farming activity for them to get their municipal taxes at a farm rate, agricultural rate, which would be much lower. And they could do that by selling a couple of things to the neighbor. So that became a big, and I know this has come up before on the Saanich Peninsula, this concept of potentially raising the income threshold in order to motivate people, to stimulate them to actually expand the land base and the productivity level so that it's harder to get your farm tax status. Basically, you have to show that you're actually producing more, and that would result potentially in more leasing opportunities, because the average estate owner wouldn't have the wherewithal to make, you know, $10,000 a year off of farming, for example. So that's one thing that's come up. The other one is, you're absolutely right about those small lots can often be enough for people to make a profitable business. Sometimes it takes, though, the community piece to really take it to the next level. So I think that the Sandown initiative has great potential, because it's going to provide this sort of centralized area for the farm equipment, for all the infrastructure, for the learning that takes place amongst people when they connect and they're there on their lots. I think that's a really nice sort of nexus that can often come to fruition, rather than people farming one-off 1/4 acres all around the municipality. So to have it centralized, I think, can be really helpful as well. And I've sort of lost my train of thought. I'm not sure if there was another specific question that I may have missed.
I did have one question. Should I do that now? Is that okay? So it's specifically around hedgerows. And what I wanted to say is that that's one of our significant ecological assets that we have here in the district of North Saanich, is we have a lot of beautiful hedgerow. And my fear is that it is actually being rapidly lost due to the patches of development happening. And when I was, I guess maybe a month ago now, I was at the Ministry of Agriculture sponsored climate change agricultural conference, and they just finished research looking at where's the most powerful carbon sequestration happening. And they looked at, you know, tilled crops and they looked at untilled crops, and they found that hedgerows actually did the most powerful job of sequestering carbon through the air. And that was research happening out of UBC. And so it just occurs to me that we're in this beautiful opportunity right now for us to look, attach some data to that ecological asset here. Like how much hedgerow do we have here? How much hedgerow do we want to have in 20 years' time? And how does that contribute to our climate change strategy? Because I noticed that it wasn't addressed at all in the report so far. People think about trees, and maybe they think about pasture land, but pasture, plant growing, and hedgerows are all really important. That's my question.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I didn't call out hedgerows, you're right, explicitly. In my mind, they're sort of in that concept of vegetative buffers, healthy riparian areas. When I was talking around the issue of payment for ecosystem services, this is something that I think is gaining more and more traction within Canada. It's been something that's been at the forefront of land stewardship in Europe for a long time, whereby farmers are compensated for ensuring that those types of habitats are not only protected, but actually enhanced. And there's actually a really great federal or national initiative that's being led by the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, where they're looking exactly at that sort of data collection that can be done on a public basis. So individuals can go out and submit their data. They've got this pretty simple methodology online that they've gone through peer-reviewed publication and so forth. So I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in that area around ecosystem services. And I think we're going to see a lot of leaps and bounds in the next 5 to 10 years. So during the life of the OCP that we're talking about. So it'll be important to include language within the OCP that will address that type of initiatives so that it can be relevant as we move forward.
Thank you. That's right on for me.
Fran, you're next, please.
Before Ione goes away here, I think hedgerows would be a much better idea to protect rather than trees, because basically as a buffer to farmland from other developments, it'll probably stand rather than trees, because at least in my neighborhood, there's a lot of tree chopping going on. So there's not going to be any carbon sequestration that way. But I'd like to have a word with Ignatius, if I could.
Yeah, just one thing before I go back on mute. So there's some really great published best practices around creating vegetative buffers, whether they're tree-based or hedgerow-based or shrubs. The Ministry of Agriculture has some great best practices published, as does the Agricultural Land Commission. And I'm not a biologist, so I'm not an expert on, what species mix is perfect, but there's, suffice to say, lots of really good information out there for anyone who's interested. Okay, I'm going to go on mute now.
Hello, Chair.
Go ahead, Jim.
I have, first of all, a procedural comment, and if I'm allowed, I'm liaison for the Planning Commission. So I think I'll see some of you people tomorrow at the Planning Commission meeting. And I don't know if we're going to be touching on this area in the Planning Commission or if we'll be dealing with the broader issues. My first procedural question is for Ignatius. Do we have to have 80% of the screen with the comments and questions flag on it? Because for those of us connecting from home, when we want to be connected with people in the municipal hall and they speak, we're looking at what's less than 5% of the screen, even when we go to speaker view, because 80% of the screen is that. See, now that changes it dramatically. And then if we do go to the speaker and the speaker somebody in the municipal hall, we can actually tell who's speaking and what they're saying. I don't think we need the questions and comments. As I said, I'm liaison, and I don't know whether we're going to cover this ground tomorrow at the Planning Commission, in which case I can save my comments and questions till then. I am a bit concerned about some of the comments so far, and I don't know, Chairman, whether I'm allowed to actually make a comment on the substantive issues. What's your thought?
I think technically you're not allowed to, but go ahead.
Okay, I won't then. I'll save it for tomorrow. I have some rather strong views on carbon sequestration and whether it's temporary or permanent, but I'll save them for tomorrow.
Nodding her head that perhaps she'd like to hear from you, Jim, so go ahead.
Who is that? Well, if we're really serious about climate change and the role that agriculture plays in it, we have to answer a few fundamental questions. The first fundamental question is, how long do forestry and agricultural practices sequester carbon? I mean, if you consider most vegetation, it sequesters a lot of carbon in the summer, taking in carbon dioxide and giving out oxygen. But within a year, it returns the largest portion of that right back to the atmosphere, giving out carbon dioxide, taking up oxygen as the leaves and needles decay and as vegetation for cropland decays. In the case of trees, some of it's stored in limbs and trunks and so on, and hedgerows, the same thing. But eventually they either die or burn or whatever, releasing all of that carbon back to the atmosphere as well. In the case of roots, there's pretty good evidence that some carbon is sequestered by roots, and it may be sequestered for longer periods of time. But I'd be interested in a clear description of for how long do plants and trees and so on really sequester carbon, or do they just hold it until they re-release it subsequently? And then finally, my observation with regard to land use and the type of agriculture in North Saanich. A lot of forage in North Saanich is produced to feed horses. The feeding of horses is a net contribution, unnecessary contribution of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. We feed horses, they grow. They grow, people ride them. They exercise, they exhale. They poop a lot, there's a lot of methane in their waste. And how that helps our carbon problem is beyond me. Forage for equestrian purposes in North Saanich perhaps should be banned. What does it serve in terms of the carbon fight? What does it serve in terms of the food situation? Not sure it serves any purpose. Anyway, just an observation on a little broader planning perspective and the role of carbon and plants and climate change. Thanks very much for the comment. That's just a by the by, and we'll probably cover more of that tomorrow.
Thank you, Jim. Fran, did you say you had one more question? Yeah, I have to ask a question. Go ahead, and then I have one question, and I'm not sure who
you're listening? You know, your guiding
I'm all ears. I'm all ears.
Your guiding principle makes no mention of two of the things that trouble me that there's no mention of, and that's transparency and accountability. You don't have that anywhere. Are you not bothered by that, by the omission?
I mean, first and foremost, I think, yes, I mean, those are absolute paramount importance. I mean, I think through your involvement in the advisory working group and through all the work that we've done, I think we've demonstrated that we are wanting to be open and transparent, but also wanted to remind you that those were the three guiding principles that were endorsed by Council back in March, and I was merely reflecting back what had been endorsed by Council. And so, but no, like without a doubt, openness, transparency, and collaboration are core components to how this OCP will be developed. Ultimately, this OCP is for your community. It's not mine. It will ultimately be your community's. So,
thank you.
Okay, I have one last question, and then if there's anyone that's attending remotely that has a question, perhaps you could let me know thereafter. My question, I'm not sure who to direct it to, but it actually is specific to the materials that we were given, page 69. There's a little blurb on the bottom of that page under the PDF of dealing with temporary use permits. And maybe I'll just read it because it's very short. It says, designate these areas through the OCP as opposed to the zoning bylaw. Consider adding general conditions to provide for broader and long-range policy direction. This could provide for a more diversified local economy for innovative and emerging uses. And I'm just asking, I think, the district personnel here and perhaps our guests, is this something that was already in the OCP as a standard wording, or is this a new idea? And what's the intention of including the wording?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So that was included in that March 2020 report that went to council. The intention with including that in the scope of the OCP review was, again, as it says here, just to have broader policy direction. Right now, temporary use permits are within our zoning bylaw as opposed to our OCP, and they're quite prescriptive with respect to agritourism accommodation, but they don't speak to the broader application of different areas such as industrial or commercial. And another intention with putting this in the OCP is to, remain up with the trends and have that flexibility that says, okay, it meets these guidelines, and then we can bring that forward to council for consideration. So just to have some more specific criteria about generally what would be supportive or conducive in certain areas.
Yeah, I guess, and just to add to that, I guess, OCPs are generally policy guiding principles where we want to get to, where a zoning bylaw is essentially setting out regulations, and therefore, in this regard, it makes more sense to have some policies around TUPs, i.e. What we may expect to see in a temporary use permit, what sort of conditions we might want to look for, rather than a zoning bylaw, which is purely a regulatory document. And so just for the Agricultural Committee's benefit, Council has recently amended the zoning bylaw, and now we do allow temporary use permits in all zones within North Saanich, and therefore somebody can submit a temporary use permit for any zone in the district of North Saanich, but under the zoning bylaw, that process would still be the same, i.e. an application would come in and staff would still take that application to committee and then to council. So for example, in the next couple of months, there'll probably be a temporary use permit in relation to McTavish Road that this committee saw that ALC application for back in November, and therefore, that's generally where we're heading.
So, I'm not a municipal person, so I don't really know the answer, but is there a concern that the temporary use permits could be used to circumvent bylaws, or from an enforcement point of view, or is it just to simply make the process simpler for someone that's going to stay within the parameters of a bylaw? Yeah, it's still a bylaw. Essentially, it's still, in relation to a bylaw, it's essentially a temporary zoning amendment. So a temporary use permit can be used, so for example, say somebody wants to open a childcare facility in a residential zone, they could submit a temporary use permit to see how it works for 3 years, to see if the community is happy with that use, and then if there is general support for that temporary use permit, then after 3 years it can be extended for a further 3 years, and then after a total of 6 years, then there is an expectation that the use would be brought in accordance with a zoning bylaw amendment. So it's a way of just allowing to see if a use could be operate on a temporary basis for a maximum of 6 years, and then there's an expectation after 6 years that temporary use permit would be revoked, and there would be an expectation that either a zoning bylaw amendment would be submitted, or the district would amend its zoning bylaw to accommodate that particular use. So the one example we've had so far is the application that we had to put some camping on some agricultural land. What other types of circumstances where that would this arise, just from an agriculture perspective?
I've seen it, if I can jump in, I've seen it used before for events on agricultural land. So here where I live on the Sunshine Coast, there's a small arts festival that happens every year. And in order to get approval, the local district provided them a temporary use permit because they wanted to make sure that the festival wouldn't have lasting negative impacts on the farmland itself. So they needed to provide an agrologist report showing before and after impacts on soil compaction. So it was a way of sort of testing the waters to see if there might be negative impacts for the use. And it usually is really that temporary nature. I've also seen it been used just through ALC applications that I've seen, once for a dog spa on farmland. So it was something that didn't fit within the home-based business bylaw at the local level, and it didn't fit in the agricultural land reserve regulations. It was sort of in this nebulous area. It didn't take up a lot of land, but it was just a use that never found its footing. And so the local government, it was in the Lower Mainland, provided a temporary use permit, again, because they wanted to see if there would be any negative impacts to the farm operation that was around it.
Okay, thank you everyone for your comments. That was helpful. Oh, and has a question?
Yes, hi everybody, good afternoon. I'm Celia Stock and I'm the council liaison to this committee. And I just wanted to ask, on page 37, there's a section that says, sorry, should I get closer to the mic? What does the regional context statement say? And that's all correct there. I'm not questioning the wording at all. But the regional growth strategy, which we worked on with our council, with the CRD and the other municipalities on the South Island, there is a specific section for each municipality, and the specific section on North Saanich, these are the general statements in the beginning about cooperation and, you know, working across the housing spectrum and all those things. But the particular section or specific section on North Saanich talks about how North Saanich, you know, its role is more in the agricultural and the green space role for the whole of the Greater Victoria area. And it's quite specific on that. I don't have a copy of the regional growth strategy in front of me, but I remember it very clearly because we all worked on it at council and went over the wording very carefully. And I think that, you know, the synchronicity between the regional growth strategy and what North Saanich's overall role is, and what you will hear from people in the community and from staff and from our history and the OCP's anterior, the ones prior to this one that we're working on, there's an incredible synchronicity between what our role is supposed to be with how the CRD views us and how the City of Victoria wants us to be sort of the agricultural or part of the agricultural area, along with Central Saanich and parts of Saanich, which is a very urban, as I'm sure you all know, a very urban community, but still has a lot of agriculture. So I thought maybe we should put that in there. I mean, I'm not preparing the consulting report. I have been a consultant, but I'm not doing this one. So I was just thinking, you know, that not only is all of this correct, what you've got on page 37, but also that sort of, you know, the dovetailing of how we're seen in the region, what our role is, and how most of the people in North Saanich see North Saanich. And I agree with what Mr. Kingham said about horse raising, but, you know, I went into this in more detail about 3 years ago as a counselor. And I talked to people in the horse community and they gave me all these statistics, and I'm sure Jen's probably seen them. And one of the issues with horses is that, you know, there is a huge amount of, a large number of people and quite a huge amount of money invested in the horse community, and it seems to generate a lot of economic growth in the province throughout BC. I was not aware of this previously, and I found it very interesting to learn that. So I understand completely what Mr. Kingham's saying and what Jim is saying, and I don't know what we do about it. I think you know, but a lot of the forage is also used for sheep. We have sheep in North Saanich and we have cattle. So it's not all going to horses. I don't know what the percentage is as divided among those different domestic animal groups, but and I'm not sure what we can do about it. Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, you know, just if I could comment on that, I think it's been observed over the last few decades that trends come and trends go around what is popular on farmland or what is economically feasible on farmland. Really, the most important thing you can do is protect the farmland itself. The use will definitely change over time, but as long as it remains agricultural, then the operators and the owners can flex and move with the times. So horses may be popular now. We don't know that that will be the case in 10 or 20 years from now. Hay and forage crops may be popular now. Maybe it'll be raspberries, blueberries, hops in the future. We don't know. The best thing we can do is just to protect the land to make sure that those opportunities remain.
Here on that one. And so we got two hands up, Jen first and then a friend.
Yeah, I guess this is just to add my thoughts into this conversation we're having. And I agree that preservation of farmland is very important. But I think in North Saanich that we do a lot of the focus on the preservation and not enough on the fostering and encouraging of food production. And that is one thing I've heard very strongly reading through the report, of the top 3 priorities that we heard from residents. Food security and agriculture is the second most important one. So we have to figure out how it is that we are going to encourage actual food production here. I think it is important for us to wrestle with that. And so that's my first comment. And the other one is, I think our perception of who we are and what our role is in the larger region, I think we have to attach some actual data to it. So when we talk about ecological assets, I'd love to know how many hedgerows we have. When we look at our forested areas, if we go walking through our forested areas, we have a massive invasives problem that I think we have to address. We have to be honest and realistic about it. If we care about the biodiversity and the ecological services provided by that forest, we can't have it being devoured by invasive ivy. Same with our wetlands. So this whole area used to be a wetland until we drained it fairly recently. We just started water testing at Sandown of the watershed water quality, and our nitrates are 16 times above the guideline limit. So we've got to take care of our watershed water, and we need to all know about it. We need to have some kind of guidelines in place, and I don't know where that happens, but I think we need to have that conversation quite seriously as part of our OCP planning. What's the state of our ecological assets and what services do they provide, so that then once we have those guidelines and goals, then we can track how we're doing over time. Because I really believe that North Saanich has a very strong role to play, ecologically speaking, for our peninsula. And we're a double green riding, so the residents are right on board. Double green riding.
Thank you. Efren, you're next.
Okay, I have a comment on the fact that we have new technologies and new discoveries all the time. I got good news. If you start feeding cows, and I don't see why we can't use this for sheep and horses, if you start feeding them a particular type of plankton, apparently they stop creating methane. Isn't that great? Anyway, the big problem I have here is the last page, page 79 of 141, suggests that there were 600 participants in this process of the OCP review, and there was a 75% satisfaction among those people for the engagement part of this process. Now, we have 11,249 people in this district. I don't think 600 is pretty representative. And I don't think that what we're doing here with this review during the time of COVID is such a good idea. I really don't think we get through to as many people as we need to in order to do this right. So that's my last question. And if any of you care to comment on that.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Yeah, so that page 79, that's part of the phase 2 engagement plan. So those are the metrics for success that the the project team have developed to measure the success of phase 2. So they weren't part of phase 1. So phase 1 engagement report is earlier in the report. That page 79 is actually the metrics that we've developed for phase 2, and those are the targets that we've set as part of phase 2, which council will then review, and hopefully at the end of phase 2 which will probably be the end of June, when we present a phase 2 engagement summary report to council, and council will measure the effectiveness of how we've met those targets that are included within that phase 2 engagement plan. And so there was discussion last night on council, and council there was some correspondence on Council's agenda last night in relation to pausing the OCP in relation to COVID, and Council last night essentially has continued to endorse the process, has endorsed phase 2 engagement plan, but there was some comments last night from Council about reviewing at the end of phase 2 how effective that engagement has been in the light of COVID, and whether we need to then pause or do further work. That will be dictated at the end of phase 2 before we commence with phase 3.
And I just have a couple of general comments going back to page 37. I just would like to thank Celia for her comments, because I totally agree with everything she raised. I think as a citizen of the District of North Saanich, I take a lot of pride in the fact that we live in what's perceived to be a breadbasket area for the Greater Victoria District. And it's, for me personally, if it's been missed, it's very important that that wording be back in there, and that it be recognized that that's something that's totally unique to the District of North Saanich. And I think that's why it's going to be facing so many challenges for development in the future. So I think it's absolutely imperative it's be there, because if it's not, it's going to get missed in future OCPs further down the road. And then lastly, as a general comment, I'd just like to thank you for your presentations. They were really informative. I thought the feedback from everybody today was really informative. All the comments were very thought-provoking. So thank everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
And if I may just quickly leave with just a few comments here based on what I've heard today, and I think all the comments, as was previously mentioned, were extremely productive, and I'm excited to dive into some of these topics with a bit more detail. Specifically, this idea that we absolutely need to find a balance between climate change and reducing our GHGs, and ensuring that we're also enhancing agricultural prosperity across North Saanich. And finding that balance is going to be really key in this official community plan. I think to a certain extent, there was absolutely no intent to not include those parts of the regional growth strategy. I think we've heard quite clearly from your staff members that we absolutely need to be aligned with the regional growth strategy and with the regional context statement. So that is certainly a big objective of this process, and we'll keep working towards ensuring that that is clear and across the entire process, and of course in the future draft OCP. And again, I'm also hearing quite clearly that we want to explore a little bit more some of that data that gives us a better understanding of the status of our ecological systems, whether they be in hedgerows, forests, and wetlands, so that we can make more informed decisions. So I wanted to thank, first of all, everyone here for your comments. It's really helpful, and it's going to inform our process and our work in a much more rich way. So thank you very much. I really appreciated the opportunity to hear all of you today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again very soon.
And it's also just worth mentioning that MODUS and Ione from Uplands Consulting will be hosting some webinars that will be taking place on February the 2nd, February the 3rd, and February the 4th. And those 3 webinars will be tackling the 3 topic areas of housing and affordability, climate action and natural systems, as well as agriculture will be the focus of one of those webinars. So I'd encourage everybody to sign up to connectnorthsaanich.ca and receive the updates, and you'll find those details of those webinars where we'll have a series of subject matter experts addressing those 3 key topic areas that this OCP will be delving into detail in phase 2.
Been there and done that, Brian. Been there and done that. February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Yeah, February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Yeah, already signed up.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're finished now with item 3, and we're now on to item 4, the staff liaison update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
That's okay. We're not doing any motions or anything. So
So yes, item 4 is a staff liaison update, and I think at previous meetings I've mentioned that we will come back to this committee with updates on applications that this committee has viewed. And so today we have an ALC decision letter in relation to the Panorama Recreation Site that was subject of an exclusion application that was submitted by the District of North Saanich on July the 20th of last year. I believe that this application came to the Agriculture Committee earlier on in 2020. And so today you've got a copy of that decision notice for your information. I would also like to draw your attention to essentially the second condition that the ALC have attached. So essentially the ALC has supported the exclusion application to remove the land from the agricultural land reserve. However, they have placed 2 conditions on the property. The first being the need to essentially liaise with the property owner to the south to ensure that that buffering meets their expectation in relation to fencing and a landscape buffer between the property to the south, which is the Canadian Centre for Plant Health. So we are in dialogue with them to see how we can meet that condition. But the second condition that we would welcome your input on is, just bear with me. My glasses, is condition 23C, which talks about the construction of an educational sign highlighting where ALR land is located in the area in consultation with the Community Planning Commission, Peninsula and Area Agricultural Commission and the Community Agricultural Commission. So we would welcome any thoughts that this committee may have in relation to what that sign should include. We have gone back to the ALC to try and see if they had any examples or any direction for us, but they've come back to us and said that, yeah, they would welcome some initial comments from this committee, and then we would sort of, I think what the intent that we were thinking is we would come to you, see what your comments are, and then we try and draft something up, present that back to the ALC, and then we'd bring it back to this committee at the next meeting and try to finalise what that sign may look like. So we think that on the basis of the information that we received from the ALC to date is a permanent sign that would be constructed or located on the property, some kind of interpretation panel that highlights the importance of agriculture to the local area. So whether that's something, not necessarily just setting out where ALR land is, but also talking about the value and benefits of agriculture. And some of that could be some of the discussion that we've heard today about the value of agriculture. But we thought we'd bring this, first of all, this application to this decision letter for your information, but also to see if there was any thoughts or comments in relation to that specific condition that the ALC has placed on this application decision.
Okay, we got 2 hands up. I think, Fran, you were up first, so go ahead.
Okay, well, Brian, do they have a choice of what sort of fencing and what sort of hedgerows or plants they put in? Because there's a lot of different ones that they've shown here. Do they have a choice on that? And correct me if I'm wrong, the nearest farmlands on both ends is like the Center for Plant Health on one side and the Roost on the other, right? The Roost development.
Yes, so the sign is essentially with the neighbouring landowner to the south in relation to the Canadian Centre for Plant Health. So we've essentially, we believe that there is adequate fencing and buffering landscaping along that southern edge. There is a chain link fence that's 2 meters high, and therefore we believe that, in principle, we think that we have met that condition. The other condition is where we're seeking some input from this committee is in relation to this educational sign, in relation to, in consultation with this committee to receive some feedback or comments from this committee as to what that sign looks like and what any ideas or thoughts on what information could be located or could be outlined on that sign.
Oh, Jen had to go. I don't think we're being asked to make a motion or anything. You're just looking for some general feedback. Have I got that correct?
I think some general feedback that could help to provide some direction to staff so that we can essentially mock up a sign and present that back to the ALC for some of their comments, and then bring that back to this committee for further comments before then finalising that sign and essentially implementing that sign so that we can essentially acknowledge with the ALC that we've met that condition and to essentially get the ALC to discharge that condition.
So I have a question too.
Go ahead, Jeannie.
Yeah, so I'm liking what I'm hearing from you. I just want to confirm I'm understanding it right. That you're talking about this is a sign not to be read from the road. This is something with a lot of detail and maybe history and background that would be posted somewhere on the panorama grounds, that like at a historical site where you've got quite a bit of information to read. Is that what you're
Yes, I think
about?
so. Yeah, I think it could be located either, at the entrance to Panorama Recreation Centre where there's a bit of footfall, or along the trail that is well used within that community. That, yeah, emphasize is, first of all, potentially identifies where the ALR is and where the boundaries of that ALR are, but also potentially talks about the role of agriculture in this area and the history of agriculture, which could be, looking back, thousands of years of how the peninsula was used for agriculture with indigenous communities right up to present day. So, but yeah, we thought we'd come to this committee first of all with essentially with a blank sheet of paper to help us try to design a sign that we could potentially then work with some kind of graphic designer to develop a sign that we could then present back to the ALC and to this committee for further input and refinement.
Yeah, and you're thinking of one sign? Like one physical sign as opposed to having a component that gets updated?
But yeah, I guess I think at this point, I think staff is open to ideas. We haven't got, we didn't receive much direction from the ALC. It was we did ask for some confirmation or some clarification on this condition, but it was the direction was a little bit vague, if I'm totally honest, and therefore we're all ears and open to any ideas that the committee may have that could help us craft something or develop something that we could go back to the ALC with.
I guess what you're saying, Brian, is they couldn't even give you the name of another district that's had to do this sign. Where the guinea pigs are?
No, exactly. I thought I'll go back to the ALC. My intent when we received the decision notice was, right, okay, let's go back to the ALC. Have they got some examples that they must have used in the past, and we could try and mock something up that we could then present to this committee. However, the further feedback and direction we got from the ALC was a little bit vague. They basically said, no, we've got no examples. We'll just leaving it up to you, really, to come up with a sign. So here I am today with a blank sheet of paper and doing some brainstorming with you folks to see if you've got any great suggestions, ideas that could give us some direction that we could then work into a sign somehow and say, yeah, okay, this seems to be going in a bit of a direction. I can see that happening on the sign. On the site, and then we could present that back to the ALC for some of their comments and feedback, and then subject to that comments and feedback, we could revise it and then bring it back to this committee for further input once we've got a draft.
Okay, I think Franz has a comment, but I'd just like to comment a little bit. I think I would need to think on this because, firstly, the question might be, what's going to be the message? Is the message like one of the things is highlight where ALR land is. Maybe the other side of that, the dark side of that, is highlighting how much ALR land we've lost since the ALR was actually created. That's another side. Another factor is trying to encourage people to get their properties back into the ALR. If it's just do a point in time, today we have this much land in the ALR, that's not really very educational to anybody. It doesn't, and maybe if we're going to be the sign developers, that's a great opportunity for the district to promote the thoughts that Celia had raised about what is the district's role in the bigger picture of the Greater Victoria District, Regional District. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions that come out of that to just give you an idea off the cuff of what should be on that sign. I really would have to think about it because, and I think the question might be, I think better question might be, what message does the district want? It seems to me like the ALR just want, what they're thinking is, we'd like an acknowledgement that the Panorama Rec Center was on ALR land. And I was sort of struggling with, whoa, what kind of message is that? You know, here we're going to say, oh, isn't ALR wonderful? But by the way, we took all of this and we put a rec center up. You know, so yeah, how you word it, I think is, it's going to take some thought. I can't give you an answer off the top of my head about what it should be. It just raises more questions than it gives me answers.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thanks. Anybody else?
Fran, I think you're next.
Sorry? Oh, I was just asking for if there's any more comments from folk out there in terms of any further ideas, or if anybody's seen any examples, or, you know, I guess from my perspective, there's definitely a role that we can try and emphasize the role of agriculture in the district of North Saanich, you know, based on our current OCP, which strongly advocates for protection of agriculture and the role that agriculture plays in the local economy. So there's certainly some things that in relation to Ione presentation as well, perhaps we can develop something that also shows some kind of a little map showing ALR land within the area as well. But
okay, first of all, if it's showing a message that says that we're having problems keeping and maintaining and enhancing and protecting our agricultural land, so be it. I mean, people should be worried about that, and that's a good thing. The other thing is, when looking at these plans for fences and trees and so on, I suggest we don't have one that has any barbed wire. We have panorama, you know, kids running around all over the place. We don't want to have them stuck on one of these things by accident. And also, if you're going to be putting up a fence and trees, let's try and make it a little aesthetic at least. And let's throw a little honeysuckle or clematis on the fence so it doesn't look bare. Okay.
Maybe plant an apple tree instead of a...
Yeah, so this sign, this is actually a requirement now?
It's essentially a condition that the ALC has placed on decision before the application can be presented to land titles to actually demonstrate that the land has been removed from the ALR.
Yeah, I mean, I get what they're wanting to do. They want to highlight that there's ALR land, and I think that's important. I do have a concern about saying this is how much land we have in the ALR at the moment, because for one, because it has decreased, but two, it could potentially increase again. So you wouldn't want to have this fixed number. You'd like to have some sort of message that would encourage people to buy into the concept of ALR and why it's important for future generations. So, and how much detail is this sign supposed to have? Is this going to be like a panel of signs or one little sign? It's going to be a panorama. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe we should just make a big mural on the side of the rec center, like a painting. A mural. Yeah.
Or it could say 30% of North Saanich's land, or I am not sure, 29% North Saanich's land.
Yeah.
In the ALR, maybe that would suffice.
Yeah.
It's not a number, but it gives you a percentage.
Yeah, or whether we could, I don't know if anybody's got any contacts with the Kelsit Primary School, Kelsit Elementary School, to see whether there's an opportunity to work with the children there to come up with some paintings around agriculture, some of those ideas of painting sheep and painting.
I love that idea. Let's delegate the sign wording to the kids in the school.
Yeah. Okay. Those are just ideas. No, thank you. No, that's helpful. I'm sure we'll be back in February with some further thoughts and ideas, and to try and get your input.
You know, you're right. The idea about the children in the lead up to, because I swim, or I used to swim before the pandemic all the time there, and then the lead up to going into the changing rooms are all those beautiful tiles that children have made.
Oh, right.
Been painted by the children. You can tell because it's children's art.
And was that Kelsit Primary School, do you know? Kelsit Elementary School?
I don't know who did it, but I think it might have been.
Okay.
But they're lovely. Some of them are sort of in the
Right, okay, that's good, okay.
Yeah, so that could be something if they maybe would want to take that on as a project. Then we could make it into a tile or whatever.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, they can't hear you right now.
Yeah, okay, no.
I'm sorry, I forgot, I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, that's led to something, I think. That's some helpful feedback, and we'll work with that, and we'll be back.
No, I think we have a council liaison update is on the agenda, but is there one, or?
Sorry, council, did you say council liaisons on the agenda?
It says, it just says as item 5, an update, but
Okay.
maybe there isn't one.
Well, I mean, we've been looking at all the same things. We have been presented with all the, on what's happening with the OCP. And before Christmas, council had a presentation by the housing needs assessment consultants and decided to receive, that's the correct verb.
Yeah.
Receive the housing needs assessment report, which informs the OCP review. We don't have a council meeting next week. We have had very packed agendas at the last 2 council meetings. A lot of transactional, what I call transactional items, because every council meeting has a combination usually of, more big P policy items like the OCP review and the housing needs assessment review, and then transactional items such as buying a new, what was that thing we were buying, an excavator, something or other, for digging out swampy and watery areas. And so we needed, the one we have is very, very old. So those are more the transactional items, and receiving the, report from financial services about where we are in our budget and those things. So we haven't had any reports yet from the new Sandown, but they've just started. So we'll probably get an update on Sandown within the next 2 months or so. And we're heading towards a strategic plan review and budget at the end of February or sometime in the beginning of March. We haven't got the date set yet, so. And our meetings are still not open to the public. We're all very physically distanced, with staff as well who are physically distanced, and we have some councillors who participate online virtually. So we're kind of motoring along, I would say, as we're all motoring along during the pandemic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There's no referral on the agenda list, so I think we're at the adjournment. We have a motion to adjourn the meeting, my friend, seconded by Megan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Jeannie.